Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In a recent video, we took a look at Tatooine and the moisture farming industry, and in that video, while trying to figure out how viable the entire profession is, we stumbled upon another question. How the hell does Tatooine have a breathable environment? It's just covered in sand. We were taught in school that trees, plants, and green vegetation help replenish oxygen in the atmosphere. That's why, as a society, we reluctantly allowed Captain Planet to carry out extrajudicial killings of individuals who threaten our oxygen producers. Plants create oxygen through a process known as photosynthesis. Inside plant cells are structures known as chloroplasts, which capture sunlight and use it to power chemical reactions. During photosynthesis, water molecules are split apart, the hydrogen is used along with carbon dioxide to build sugars like glucose that fuel a plant's growth. The oxygen from the water is released into the air as a byproduct. In this way, plants turn sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into food for themselves and oxygen for us. It's a beautiful natural system, and it is essential to sustaining life here on Earth. But Tatooine doesn't seem to have any vegetation on it, aside from the few plants we see being kept inside of people's homes for decoration. All the planet seems to be just home to one single biome, desert. Nothing green, no chlorophyll in sight. As a matter of fact, in Star Wars, we see a lot of planets like this, single biome, without any vegetation, yet people are somehow able to walk around and breathe. Mustafar, with its lava pits and smoky skies, might have an atmosphere that is irritating to those with sensitive respiratory systems, but you don't need an oxygen mask to live there. The same thing goes with Hoth. You'll quickly learn just how much moisture you lose from breathing into the air, but you'll freeze to death long before you actually run out of oxygen. Despite the fact that it's probably too cold for any plant to survive on the surface of Hoth, unless, you put like a down coat on them or something. So what's going on? Is Star Wars just creating planets with breathable atmospheres so that we can see the actors' faces? Luke and his family wearing rebreathers or helmets definitely would have changed the vibe a bit for Lucas's space epic. So I did some research about how oxygen can be produced, and I stumbled upon some pretty interesting ideas that actually might make Tatooine work as a planet. Let's take a look. So first, Tatooine used to be a vibrant jungle planet with oceans. It wasn't always this dry and dusty. That only happened after the Rakatans glassed the planet with energy weapons. Now, before bombardment, most of Tatooine's oxygen would have been stored and potentially even produced in the ocean. Water, aka H2O, is made out of 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule. The oceans also have massive oxygen generating capabilities because of the organisms living in them. For instance, here on Earth, we're taught that the rainforests are the lungs of the planet, but in reality, trees and vegetation produce less oxygen than the ocean does, at least here on Earth. Part of this is because 70% of our planet is covered in water, and there's a lot of deforestation going on at the same time. Anyway, inside of the oceans, we have these tiny organisms known as phytoplankton. These are probably some of the most important creatures on our entire planet. Not only are these tiny creatures the base of the entire oceanic food chain, they produce roughly 50% of the entire planet's oxygen through photosynthesis. I'm assuming that Tatooine used to have a system just like this, creating oxygen in the ocean, which they unfortunately lost once the Rakatans boiled away the oceans. They also lost all of their trees and vegetation too, when the Rakatans set them on fire with orbital bombardment. To make matters worse, the intense heat that the surface is exposed to would lead to oxidation of many minerals like iron and sulfur, which further draws more oxygen from the atmosphere. But here's the thing, Tatooine's bombardment was only surface level, which is a good thing, I guess. Let's say the Death Star attacked Tatooine and hit the core of the planet. That could potentially disrupt the planet's magnetosphere, which would allow the solar winds to come in and strip Tatooine's atmosphere clean. That would definitely remove all of Tatooine's oxygen and make it very hard for the Star Wars story to play out. Surface bombardment means that the surface of the planet would remain volatile for many years, but the atmosphere would still be, relatively contained around the planet. It wouldn't just all fly out into space. Some of it would, but not all of it. Oxygen in the form of water vapor could definitely reach escape velocity and dissipate into space in some levels, but oxygen is a heavier molecule than hydrogen, and so you would see, large amounts of oxygen still remaining in the atmosphere. And because most of the surface life is destroyed for thousands of years, the atmosphere could remain relatively stable when it comes to those oxygen levels that remain. There wouldn't be animals breathing, there wouldn't be plants decomposing. The only type of oxygen removal from the atmosphere would come through chemical reactions, like oxidation again. Now, if the oxygen levels do remain the same for long periods of time, that does create stability and allows life to emerge from, the subterranean areas of the planet and come to the surface. Some creatures might also have to evolve and adapt to the new environment, but as long as you have stability over a longer period of time, It's possible. Not all would be destroyed, and as we know now about Tatooine, there is a huge ecosystem hidden beneath the surface of the sands with all types of different creatures. Now, we learned about the oxygen-producing capabilities of oceans. We know about the oxygen-producing capabilities of the rainforest, but what about the desert? Well, those ancient creatures who survived the initial glassing, they would form this new oxygen system or cycle. In our own world, in the deserts, we have organisms known as cyanobacteria. These are single-celled photosynthetic bacteria. They live in soil crusts and are extremely hardy and can survive decades of drought. We also have vegetation in the deserts. The Tuscan Raiders sustain themselves off of black melons, which I'm guessing are a fruit that's connected to a plant that produces oxygen through photosynthesis. You can also probably find lichen and, kind of algae that can emerge in drier areas, and that produces a new oxygen system. It's going to be very fragile, but it's something. And over the years, oxygen levels slowly recovered somewhat until the current time, where we see multiple oxygen-breathing species on the planet. It should be noted that the current oxygen-producing system on Tatooine is very weak, right? I can't stress this enough, but the point is there's a lot of oxygen left from before the Rakatans destroyed the atmosphere. Remember, Tatooine used to be a very tropical planet, which means they had a lot more vegetation. They had big oceans. So I'm guessing that the oxygen saturation levels were really high, kind of almost like prehistoric Earth, when we had all of this megaflora, these large insects, this very oxygen-rich environment. If you start out with a lot of oxygen, even if you do lose some, you still retain pretty high levels. What we need is a certain saturation of oxygen in the atmosphere, but we don't need huge amounts of it, if it makes any sense. And here's the thing, humans, we don't consume nearly as much oxygen as you might think, especially compared to just natural events in the biosphere. In 2019 to 2020, Australian bushfires burned 400 million tons of biomass, and the oxygen consumed by those fires equal to about 30% of all annual human breathing oxygen. So even if photosynthesis stopped today, let's say all of the trees died, the phytoplankton died in the waters, it would still take a really long time for humanity to consume all of the oxygen in the atmosphere. It would take thousands and thousands of years. And so yeah, Tatooine having a breathable environment isn't as crazy as you would think. We have the high residual oxygen levels from when Tatooine was a vibrant and rich world with oceans and vegetation. The atmosphere has become thinner and drier, but it stabilizes with livable oxygen levels. And the replacement of that oxygen is okay, even with a more fragile oxygen system, because desert biomes don't produce that much oxygen. The population on Tatooine is extremely low, and so their consumption of oxygen will be negligible. Furthermore, there's probably a lot of terraforming technology that they have on in stars that we don't have here on Earth. Like when those mining corporations started, prospecting on Tatooine, they could have dropped not only the sand crawlers, but maybe microorganisms in the sand that can, create oxygen through photosynthesis. Maybe the moisture farmers have their own technology, maybe artificial photosynthesis machines that could also create enough oxygen to replace whatever they're taking. The options are kind of limitless in this type of environment. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.